All right, Jesse on Fire, welcome back to the channel. So I want to talk to you guys about something relating to Charles Oliveira, the lightweight division, and an emerging risk that I've been thinking about, like a big risk, a risk that should be unacceptable to the fans, the UFC, Charles, and everybody else involved, okay? So I watched Chael's video this morning where he actually implied that maybe Chandler might be fighting Nate Diaz. I'll do another video about that actually. But the gist of his video was about who should Charles fight next, right? Like it was like, you know, no one's calling for that fight. A, that's not true. Islam's calling for that fight. I've seen him call for it. I've seen Khabib call. At least I saw Khabib calling for it, which I don't have a problem with. Like Khabib has a bigger voice, so he should call for it. But I mean, clearly everyone on Islam Makhachev's team is calling for that fight. Okay. And I'll give you some backstory on that, and then we'll talk about a couple other things. But anyway, before I do, if you like the content, subscribe and ring the bell. Tell everybody that you know, because if you don't, you will regret it because you won't have shared such an important channel with them. Anyway, but give this video a like if you agree and share it with people if you agree, because I'm actually serious. This is important. It's a big risk that I see on the horizon that I don't like the thought of. Okay, so basically, here's where we're at, okay? I'm gonna state my position from the beginning, okay? So we just went through a phase of the UFC where we had Khabib and we had Tony Ferguson, and I'll tell you why I was thinking about this, right? So I have a friend that I brought to the UFC who didn't know anything about the UFC until very recently, like right before going to the UFC, and I gave him basically like a crash course. Like I gave him some documentaries to watch to get him caught up on who some of these people were. So he learned about Charles Oliveira, he learned about Justin Gaethje. He learned about Michael Chandler. He learned some about Tony Ferguson, but not the full picture, right? And he knows who Conor McGregor is. And so basically my method of like getting him all the way in on the UFC, because he was like, after the UFC, he was like, dude, I'm hooked, man. This is amazing. And so he started like asking me questions last night. He's all, okay, one thing I don't understand, why is Tony Ferguson so popular? He seems kind of like a prick. And so I walked him through the saga that was Tony Ferguson's career and the 5 times he tried to fight Khabib. And then I also walked him through the situation with Khabib and when he retired and the Conor stuff and how they were trying to set up that rematch, etc. All of that stuff. And you know, what came out of that for me was just remembering the fact that Tony Ferguson, while in his prime, who was essentially unbeatable at the time, never fought Khabib while also in his prime. And that's a tragedy. Like that is a legit tragedy. Okay. Like we kind of just move on because, you know, Khabib retired. Tony was still here. He started losing. So it was like, oh, you know, I guess, you know, probably would have gone this way or that way, you know, whatever. Okay. Well, the difference between a guy who's 35 and a guy who's 38 is a lot, right? A lot. Tony's in the dead center of his prime when he's 35. And by the time he's 38, he's in trouble, right? Okay. Well, we never got to see that fight. We never got to see it, right? And maybe had we got to see it and one of them would have won decisively, then we'd know. But we didn't get to see it. And that's a tragedy. That's an MMA tragedy. You know, when you really think about it, when you really put yourself back in the place of remembering these guys' career and remembering exactly where they were, the fact that those guys never fought, it's not funny anymore. There's no like, oh man, that fight's cursed. It sucks, man. Like it sucks that we never got to see that fight. It's terrible. Okay? And so when I thought about that, and then I looked at the landscape now, right? And it's like, okay, who should Charles Oliveira fight next? And it's like, Khabib. He should fight Khabib next. Like, he should fight Khabib next, right? I mean, honestly, like, Khabib never lost a round, is still in his prime. Of course, if we could somehow get Khabib to fight, that's the dream fight because Charles has run through the entire division. Like, now, there's no question who the best lightweight is. None. He beat Gaethje, stoppage. Beat Dustin, stoppage. Beat Chandler, stoppage. And that was coming off the back of 9 or 10 straight wins before that. And these guys are the top of the division. And he stopped all 3 of them. Right? And so you look at that and then you go, what about Khabib? And it's like, what beat everybody? I mean, you know, lost a round to Conor when you know, Khabib took the round off. When I tell people who Khabib is, I go, he went 29-0 and never lost a round. I don't even mention the Conor round because it's not like he got knocked down. It's not like he got anything heavy landed on him. He just basically took the round off. You know, he stood with Conor for a round. Conor was tired. He didn't hurt him. If that's going to be the thing that breaks a never lost the round, then it never happened as far as I'm concerned. And so that storyline, like Charles, definitive champion, and Charles never fought Khabib. The one guy Khabib never fought is Charles. Okay, it's obvious, right? Like that would be the Grand Slam, event. But you can't have Khabib because he's retired, right? Well, is there any other kind of like, side letter, dramatic thing going on anywhere in the vicinity of that? It's like, oh, right. Why did Khabib retire again? It's like, oh, because Khabib's father had a vision for coaching Khabib to become 30-0. And then once Khabib retired, Islam Makhachev, his protege, would come up and become the champion. And you're like, okay, like this is me telling him. And I'm like, he's like, oh, so where's Islam at? I'm like, oh, he's undefeated. And people think he's just as good as Khabib, if not better. Wait, really? It's like, yeah. And he might be next in line. It's like, oh, damn. So it's like, yeah, damn. Okay. So from that moment, talking to a new fan, right? What sounds like the correct play from there? Is it, well, obviously we got to make the Islam and Charles Oliveira fight, right? Like you're saying he's as good as Khabib. You're like, no one has even, he got caught with one shot long time ago. And since then, he's become the hardest guy to hit on the feet in the entire UFC. And he has basically faced nearly zero resistance since then. He's run through everyone. Okay. So then why wouldn't they fight next? It's like, well, he's technically set to fight Dariush next. And it's like, well, who's Dariush? He's like a really dangerous guy, that doesn't have a big following. It's like, okay, so why on earth would we do that? Well, they said they were going to. It's like, okay, well, we just got through an era where we missed out on the Tony Ferguson and Khabib fight, right? Missed out on it, right? Like completely missed it. It was right there and we missed it. Now, it's certainly not the UFC's fault. Just a long sequence of circumstances that, ultimately potentially led to the world going through a pandemic because, they would have fought in 2020 if we didn't go through a pandemic, right? I mean, like, so we just missed that one. Do we really want to miss this one? Charles, you're not going to get Khabib and Charles, at least not right now. The best case for getting it is if Charles beats Islam. I'm just saying, if Charles beats Islam, maybe get Khabib back. But even still, why would we risk not getting that fight? Okay, now I understand Chandler will sell more pay-per-views. And I'm not going to argue against Chandler because he's the guy. Like when it comes to who gets a title shot, we all know it's not just do you win the fight. It's also Chandler could not do a better job. Can't. So if they give it to Chandler, I'm with it, dude. But to risk, as a true fan of the sport, to not get to see Makhachev fight Charles Oliveira for the title, to risk that. I don't like it. I can't help myself. I don't care about Dariush versus Charles Oliveira. I don't care. I don't care about that fight. I care about the Islam fight because there's so much substance to that story. There's so much depth to that story. Islam has looked unbeatable. He's smashed everyone. Quality of opponent, not quite as good, but essentially faced no resistance. The stylistic matchup is incredibly interesting, right? Because if Charles can nullify Islam going to the ground, guess what? Now you've got a stand-up war between these guys. What's Islam got on the feet? We don't really know. I just don't like the idea of potentially missing another fight, another big fight. Obviously you'll get to see a Charles Oliveira versus someone fight. But we've got Islam Makhachev, who is essentially pretty close to where Tony Ferguson was when we started trying to make the Khabib and Tony Ferguson fight. And you got Charles right there also. And it's like, can we put two immovable objects together? Can we just not think too much about this? Can we just put two immovable objects in the octagon together and let's see what happens? Especially when you think of what people love Khabib, man. And by extension, they will root for Islam. And when you put into context what's on the line for Khabib, right? And I don't mean to act like Islam doesn't matter. He's obviously his own man. He's his own fighter. He's incredible. But in terms of a storyline that people can sink their fucking teeth into, when people can actually wrap their brain around why Khabib retired and understand that the central piece of why he retired is to become the coach and take on the legacy from his father, and his father's direct, verbalized vision is for Khabib to retire undefeated and then have Islam become the champion. And if people can actually wrap their brain around how much that means to Islam and Khabib, and then put it up against this immovable champion who's run through everyone, who comes from the slums of Rio de Janeiro and is fighting for every single thing. He's got illiterate parents. His parents can't fucking read or write. Okay? You put those two stories together, and if people can't understand why that's an important fight, they're too fucking stupid to watch the sport, and they're definitely not smart enough to watch this motherfucking channel. So, for me, give me that fucking fight, dude. Now. Like, give me that fight now. No more risks. No Dariush. Give me that fucking fight, dude. I don't want to lose that fight. Anyway, that's what I've got. Peace.